The sound came through the walls of the old Victorian house like a distant whisper, almost imperceptible in the stillness of the Portland night. Dorothy Morgan couldn't sleep, her tired 68-year-old eyes fixed on the ornate ceiling of her bedroom. It was the third night in a row that she had heard those noises coming from the house next door, number 147 Maple Street, which had supposedly been empty for more than 8 months. Dorothy knew the property well. For 40 years, she had watched generations of the Harrison family grow up there, until the last of them, Richard Harrison, passed away without leaving any heirs. Since then, the house had remained closed, its windows covered in weathered boards, a silent reminder of more prosperous times. But on that October night, something was different. The crying Dorothy heard was not the product of her imagination or the ghost stories her granddaughter Rebecca loved so much. It was real, human, and filled with an anguish that made her heart squeeze. With trembling hands, Dorothy reached for the phone on the bedside table. She hesitated for a moment, thinking of the times she had called the police for reasons that later turned out to be trivial. The neighbors already called her Cat Lady. Even though she only had one, Old Whiskers, who was now tense, his alert ears turned towards the wall that divided the two houses. Portland Police Department, what's the emergency? The voice on the other end of the line was young and professional. This is Dorothy Morgan from 145 Maple Street. I know it may sound silly, but she paused, gathering her courage. There are sounds coming from the house next door, number 147. It's been abandoned for months, but I could swear I hear crying. Officer Marcus Bennett, 32, a veteran of the Portland Police Force, expected nothing more than another routine occurrence when he received the call. Maybe some teenagers using the abandoned house for parties, or homeless people seeking shelter from the autumn cold. Still, something in the lady's trembling voice made him take the situation more seriously. When the car pulled up in front of the Harrisons' house, the full moon cast unsettling shadows through the leafy branches of the trees. Bennett and his partner, Officer Lauren Rodriguez, approached cautiously. Dorothy was waiting for them on her porch, wrapped in a flowered robe, Whiskers at her feet. "The sounds are coming from the basement," she whispered, as if she feared being overheard. "They started 3 nights ago." Rodriguez, with his 5 years of experience in domestic violence cases, noticed something familiar in the tone of those muffled cries. It wasn't the sound of teenage parties or homeless people. It was something deeper, more desperate. After a quick inspection around the property, the officers found a partially opened basement window. The glass was broken on the inside, and fresh marks in the dust indicated movement. Bennett called for reinforcements before proceeding. The basement smelled musty and abandoned. The beams of the flashlights revealed peeling walls and furniture covered in dusty sheets. That's when they heard it, a muffled sob coming from behind an old chest of drawers. "Portland Police," Bennett announced, his voice echoing in the confined space. "You can come out. Nobody's going to hurt you." Slowly, 3 figures emerged from the shadows. They were girls, none older than 16. Their clothes were dirty and torn, their faces marked by tears and deep circles under their eyes. The oldest, who later identified herself as Ashley Cooper, stepped forward, placing herself protectively in front of the other 2. "Please," her voice was just a hoarse whisper, "don't take us back there." Rodriguez approached carefully, noticing the bruises on the younger girl's arms. "Where to?" "The Sunrise Shelter," Ashley replied, her green eyes filled with terror. They do things to the girls there." The silence that followed was as heavy as lead. Bennett and Rodriguez exchanged meaningful glances. The Sunrise Shelter was one of the largest foster care institutions in the state of Maine, responsible for dozens of minors in vulnerable situations. In the hours that followed, the Harrisons' home became the epicenter of an investigation that would shake the structures of Portland's social welfare system. The 3 teenagers, Ashley Cooper, Madison Taylor, and Kayla Peterson, were taken to hospital, where doctors documented evidence of systematic abuse. Dorothy watched from her bedroom window as cars and ambulances filled the quiet street. Whiskers curled up on her legs, purring softly. She thought of all the nights she had spent awake, listening to those cries, and felt a mixture of relief and guilt for not having acted sooner. Officer Bennett remained at the scene long after his shift had ended, taking statements and coordinating with social services. Something in his eyes had changed. The police routine had given way to a steely determination to uncover the truth behind the girl's accusations. Lauren Rodriguez, for her part, couldn't get Ashley Cooper's expression out of her head at the mention of the shelter. In 15 years on the force, she had never seen such fear in the eyes of someone so young. As she drove back to the police station, her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her mind already plotting the first steps of the investigation that was to follow. In the Harrison house, now surrounded by yellow police tape, silence reigned once again. But it was no longer the silence of abandonment. It was the silence that precedes the storm, the moment of calm before long-buried truths surface, bringing with them the promise of justice and change. The morning after the rescue, investigator Rachel Winters watched through the mirrored glass of the testimony room as Ashley Cooper, the eldest of the three girls, stared at her own trembling hands. With 15 years' experience in child abuse cases, Rachel rarely allowed herself to get emotionally involved, but there was something different about this case. It started about 6 months ago. Ashley began, her voice low but firm. When Principal Richardson took over the Sunrise Shelter, the older girls were the first to notice the changes. Rachel leaned forward, taking note of every detail, as Ashley described a meticulous system of abuse and exploitation. Richardson had turned what was supposed to be a refuge into a nightmare, bringing in special visitors at night, well-dressed men who selected girls for special mentoring programs. In the next room, Officer Lauren Rodriguez was interviewing Madison Taylor, 14, who was shivering while holding a cup of hot chocolate. Ms. Harrison used to visit the shelter, Madison revealed unexpectedly. She suspected something. She always asked if we were okay, if we needed help. Then, one day, she just stopped coming. The mention of the former owner of the abandoned house made Rodriguez pause. Elizabeth Harrison, Richard's wife, had been a well-known children's rights activist until her sudden disappearance 2 years ago. Her body was found months later in an apparent car accident. Officer Bennett, going through old files at the police station, discovered something intriguing. Elizabeth Harrison had made several complaints to the Department of Social Services about irregularities at the Sunrise Shelter, all of which were dismissed without proper investigation. Dorothy Morgan, still troubled by the events of the night before, rummaged through old boxes of photos in her attic. Among dozens of images of the neighborhood over the years, she found one that made her heart squeeze. Elizabeth Harrison, smiling on her balcony, surrounded by teenagers from the shelter during a community barbecue. She knew, Dorothy murmured to herself, recalling her last conversations with her former neighbor. Elizabeth was trying to protect them. At Portland City Hall, the news of the girls' rescue caused a quiet stir. Mayor Michael Sullivan called an emergency meeting with his staff. The Sunrise Shelter received substantial public funds and private donations, and its political connections ran deep. Kayla Peterson, the youngest of the three, finally began to speak after hours of silence in hospital. Social worker Christina Martinez, specially assigned to the case, listened in horror as the girl described an elaborate system of falsified documents and irregular adoptions. Some girls would just disappear, Kayla whispered. Richardson would say they had been adopted or transferred, but we could never say goodbye. And when we asked too much, we were punished. Rachel Winters connected her laptop to the department's secure network, discovering a disturbing pattern. Over the past 18 months, dozens of teenagers had left the Sunrise Shelter without proper documentation. The dates coincided with large bank transfers to a shell company linked to Richardson. The case was beginning to reveal ramifications that went far beyond Portland. Bennett found connections between the Sunrise Shelter and a network of similar establishments in 3 different states, all with similar patterns of disappearances and financial irregularities. Dorothy, unable to sleep, spent the night organizing decades of notes and newspaper clippings. Elizabeth Harrison had entrusted her with a sealed envelope months before her death, making her promise that she would only open it if something happened to her. Dorothy never had the courage to open it, until now. Inside the envelope, as well as documents detailing suspicions about the Sunrise Shelter, was a letter addressed to the police. "If you are reading this," Elizabeth wrote, "it means that they have silenced me. But they can't silence the truth forever." Rachel Winters received an anonymous call at 3 a.m. The voice on the other end was that of a former shelter employee, trembling with fear. "It's not just Portland," she revealed. "It's a whole network. Richardson is just the tip of the iceberg. Look for the records of the New Aurora Foundation." The three girls, now under protection in a temporary safe house, were beginning to show signs of recovery. Ashley, in particular, emerged as a natural leader, helping the others process their trauma and actively collaborating with the investigations. Lauren Rodriguez spent hours going through old car accident records. The report into Elizabeth Harrison's death had serious inconsistencies. The braking marks, the angle of impact, everything indicated that it had not been an accident. The investigation was now branching out in several directions, each discovery leading to new and disturbing revelations. Rachel Winters realized that they were facing something much bigger than initially imagined, a conspiracy stretching back years, involving powerful figures and millions of dollars. Dorothy Morgan gazed out of her window at the Harrisons' abandoned property, wondering how a simple sound of crying had triggered an investigation that promised to expose years of hidden crimes. Whiskers rubbed against his legs, as if sensing his restlessness. At the police station, Bennett nailed photos and documents to a board, connecting dots with red lines. The pattern that emerged was frightening. A sophisticated human trafficking network, using shelters as a front, protected by years of political connections and institutional corruption. The truth was beginning to emerge from the shadows, but with it came a sense of urgency and danger. For every answer found, two new questions arose, and it became increasingly clear that powerful people would do anything to keep their secrets buried. Investigator Rachel Winters stared at the wall of evidence in her office, now covered in photos, documents, and connections marked in red. 3 days had passed since the girls' rescue, and each new discovery only confirmed her worst suspicions about the extent of corruption in the social care system. "You need to see this," said Bennett, rushing into the room with a worn briefcase. "We found more financial records from the New Aurora Foundation. The transactions match perfectly with the disappearances." Rachel examined the documents, her stomach churning as the figures revealed a disturbing pattern. Large sums of money were transferred to offshore accounts shortly after each irregular adoption. The scheme was sophisticated, but left traces for anyone who knew where to look. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Ashley Cooper received an unexpected visit. Sandra Mitchell, a former employee of the Sunrise Shelter, had decided to break her silence after seeing the news. Her hands were shaking as she clutched a USB stick. "I kept copies of everything," Sandra whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Richardson never knew, but I documented every irregularity. I was afraid to speak out after what happened to Mrs. Harrison." Officer Rodriguez, who was accompanying the visitor, picked up the USB stick carefully. "Are you saying that Elizabeth Harrison's death—" "It wasn't an accident," Sandra added, her voice barely audible. "She found out about the political connections. Mayor Sullivan, Judge Morrison, they were all involved. Elizabeth threatened to expose everything." In the house next door to the old Harrison mansion, Dorothy Morgan welcomed an unexpected figure into her living room. Nancy Harrison, Richard and Elizabeth's niece, who had flown in from Seattle as soon as she heard the news. "Aunt Elizabeth tried to tell me," said Nancy, holding a cup of tea with trembling hands. "2 weeks before she died, she called me. She was scared. She said she'd discovered something terrible. I should have done more." Dorothy shared the contents of the envelope Elizabeth had left, and together they began to organize decades of evidence meticulously collected by the late activist. Among the notes, they found references to a remote property in New Hampshire where some of the girls were supposedly taken. At the police station, the investigation was gaining momentum. Rachel Winters and her team discovered that the New Dawn Foundation operated a network of halfway houses in 5 different states. Each establishment followed the same pattern. Vulnerable teenagers disappeared into the system, while large sums of money circulated through shell companies. Madison Taylor, still in hospital, finally found the courage to reveal more details about the shelter's special visitors. They had a list, she explained to Christina Martinez, the social worker. They chose the girls based on photos, as if we were in a catalog. The revelation led the team to an even more disturbing discovery. On a private server, protected by several layers of security, they found hundreds of photographs of teenage girls in the foster care system, all cataloged with prices and specifications. Mayor Sullivan, sensing the siege closing in, called an emergency press conference. His hands were sweating as he denied any knowledge of the illicit activities at the Sunrise Shelter. But Rachel noticed how his eyes betrayed his nervousness when reporters mentioned the New Dawn Foundation. Ashley, regaining her strength, began working with a forensic artist to identify the shelter's visitors. Each face she helped put together was a new piece in the puzzle, connecting prominent figures in Portland society to the trafficking scheme. Lauren Rodriguez spent hours interviewing former employees of the shelter who, encouraged by Richardson's arrest, began to talk. Their stories complemented each other, revealing a system of intimidation and blackmail that kept everyone silent. Dorothy and Nancy, going through Elizabeth's files, found something crucial: a series of secretly taken photographs showing meetings between Richardson and high-ranking members of the state government at a private club. The dates coincided with large financial transfers to the New Aurora Foundation. She knew, murmured Nancy, looking at the photos. Aunt Elizabeth found out and paid for it with her life. Rachel Winters received an anonymous phone call that would change the course of the investigation. The voice on the other end belonged to a former foundation driver, willing to testify about the trips he made taking young people to the estate in New Hampshire. The investigation was now turning into an interstate operation. The FBI was officially involved, and special agents began arriving in Portland. But Rachel insisted on keeping her local team at the center of the investigation. They had come too far to be sidelined now. Kayla Peterson, the youngest of the survivors, had a breakthrough in her recovery when she identified one of the visitors in an old photo from a charity event. The man was James Morrison, the federal judge responsible for overseeing adoption cases in the state. Bennett, working tirelessly, discovered a connection between Elizabeth Harrison's death and a private enforcer known to work for criminal organizations. Phone records showed calls between him and numbers associated with the New Aurora Foundation in the weeks leading up to the accident. As more evidence emerged, Rachel realized that they were unearthing something much bigger than a local corruption scheme. It was a sophisticated network that stretched across the entire northeastern United States, involving politicians, judges, and respected businessmen. Dorothy Morgan looked out of her window at the Harrison mansion, thinking about how her neighbor had fought this corrupt system single-handedly. Now, finally, the truth that Elizabeth had tried to expose was coming to light, and with it, the hope of justice for hundreds of young women victimized over the years. Federal Prosecutor Amanda Reese's office was buzzing with activity that Thursday morning. On her desk, piles of documents detailed a web of corruption that spanned decades. Rachel Winters had just handed over the latest evidence collected, including Sandra Mitchell's USB stick. "This is bigger than we imagined," Amanda said, looking through the files. "We have judges, politicians, businessmen, all connected through the New Dawn Foundation." Elizabeth Harrison was right all along. Rachel nodded, thinking of the 3 teenage girls who had triggered the whole investigation. Ashley Cooper, now under witness protection, continued to provide crucial information about the operation of the scheme. "Richardson has started to move," Bennett informed her, entering the room with a cup of coffee in hand. "Our informants say he's trying to contact people in positions of power. We need to act fast." The investigation had revealed that the Sunrise Shelter was just one of many points in a sophisticated human trafficking network. The New Aurora Foundation, apparently a reputable charitable organization, served as a front for operations in 5 different states. Dorothy Morgan and Nancy Harrison continued their meticulous work of organizing the evidence left behind by Elizabeth. Among the documents, they found something disturbing: a list of dates and locations that coincided with the disappearance of several young women from the foster care system. "Look at this." Nancy pointed to a specific note. Aunt Elizabeth marked these dates with a specific code. They're all nights when there were foundation charity events. Lauren Rodriguez, investigating the estate in New Hampshire, discovered a network of underground tunnels connecting several buildings. Records showed that the property had been purchased through a series of shell companies, all linked to the New Dawn Foundation. Madison Taylor, still recovering in hospital, had a crucial memory during a session with her therapist. There was a special room in the basement of the shelter, she revealed. Richardson kept a black folder there. He always checked the numbers after the visitors had left. The investigation team set up a covert operation to recover the folder. Bennett, disguised as a city inspector, gained access to the Sunrise shelter. In the basement, behind a false panel, he found not only the briefcase, but an external hard drive containing detailed records of financial transactions. "We have everything," Rachel told Prosecutor Reese. "Records of payments, dates of transfers, even videos of meetings with buyers." Richardson documented everything. Mayor Sullivan, feeling the siege closing in, tried one last desperate gambit. He called a private meeting with members of the city council, unaware that the room was bugged by the investigation team. "We need to contain this." His voice trembled on the audio. "If this investigation continues, we all go down." The foundation has been generous to our city for years. Christina Martinez, the social worker assigned to the case, discovered that several other professionals had tried to report irregularities in the past. All of them were transferred, fired, or, in some cases, suffered mysterious accidents. Kayla Peterson, the youngest of the survivors, finally found the strength to identify more visitors and photographs. Each new recognizable face led to more connections, revealing a network that extended to the highest circles of state power. "We need federal protection," Amanda Reese declared after reviewing the latest evidence. "This goes beyond Portland, beyond Maine. We're dealing with an international criminal organization." Dorothy, watching the movement of federal agents through the neighborhood, thought of Elizabeth Harrison. "She died trying to protect these girls," she told Nancy. "Now we can finish what she started." Rachel Winters organized a joint task force with the FBI. Simultaneous operations were planned for several locations connected to the New Aurora Foundation. The priority was to rescue other possible victims and secure evidence before it could be destroyed. Ashley Cooper, regaining her strength day by day, worked with experts to map the trafficking network. Her extraordinary memory and unwavering courage provided crucial details about routes, locations, and procedures used by the criminals. "They never imagined that we would be heard," Ashley told Rachel during a deposition session. "They thought we were just commodities, numbers on their spreadsheets. But Elizabeth Harrison saw us as people. And now, thanks to her and Mrs. Morgan, others see us too." The investigation had turned into one of the largest anti-human trafficking operations in the recent history of the American Northeast. Each new discovery revealed more ramifications, more people involved, more lives affected by the criminal scheme. Lauren Rodriguez, reviewing the evidence surrounding Elizabeth Harrison's death, found a final piece of the puzzle: security camera records showing a suspicious vehicle following Elizabeth's car on the night of the accident. The driver was identified as a known executioner linked to the foundation. "We are ready to act," Amanda Reese announced at a final meeting with the team. "Tomorrow at dawn, simultaneously in 5 states, we will dismantle this organization." Elizabeth Harrison did not die in vain. Rachel stared at the wall of evidence in her office, thinking about how a simple call about crying in a basement had led to the discovery of one of the biggest criminal conspiracies in the state. The truth, buried for so long, was finally coming to light. Dawn was barely breaking in Portland when dozens of police cars, FBI vehicles, and tactical teams silently positioned themselves around various points in the city. Rachel Winters, wearing a bulletproof vest over her blazer, was once again checking the action plan on her tablet. "All teams in position," Bennett's voice crackled over the radio, awaiting order to commence operation. Operation Aurora, as it was called, would be the largest coordinated action against human trafficking in the history of the American Northeast. Simultaneously, in 5 different states, police forces were preparing to dismantle the criminal network that operated under the facade of the New Aurora Foundation. In hospital, Ashley Cooper couldn't sleep. Through the window of her protected room, she watched the first lights of day, knowing that this morning would mark the beginning of the end of the nightmare she and so many other young women had lived. "They're coming," whispered Madison, who shared the room with her. The two girls had become inseparable, finding strength in each other to face the traumas of the past. Dorothy Morgan was also awake, sitting on her balcony with Nancy Harrison. The two women had spent the evening organizing the latest evidence found in Elizabeth's files. Whiskers, always alert, observed the unusual movement in the street. "Commence operation." The voice of prosecutor Amanda Reese sounded over the radios at exactly 6 a.m. In a matter of minutes, the silence of the morning was broken by the synchronized action of the police forces. At the Sunrise Shelter, federal agents found Richardson trying to destroy documents in his office. The director, surprised in the middle of the action, didn't even have time to react. Lauren Rodriguez led the team that raided Mayor Sullivan's mansion. The politician was found making frantic phone calls, trying to alert other members of the organization. In his home, agents discovered a safe full of compromising documents and drives with information about the foundation's operations. "We found 3 more girls," said an FBI agent over the radio. The team that raided the property in New Hampshire had located a secret basement where young girls were kept before being transported out of the country. Christina Martinez coordinated a team of social workers and psychologists prepared to offer immediate support to the rescued victims. Years of experience had not prepared her for the magnitude of the trauma they would encounter. At Portland Central Police Station, Rachel watched the simultaneous operations unfold through monitors. Each new arrest revealed more connections, more people involved in the criminal scheme. Judge Morrison was detained on his yacht, trying to leave the country. "Elizabeth would be proud," said Nancy, watching the news on television at Dorothy's house. "She always said the truth would come out, no matter how long it took." Kayla Peterson, the youngest of the 3 original survivors, worked with a special team to identify other victims in databases and seize photographs. Her extraordinary memory was helping to reconstruct years of covered-up crimes. The FBI's Financial Crimes Department began to unravel the complex money laundering system used by the foundation. Millions of dollars had been moved through shell companies and offshore accounts, all the money traced back to prominent figures in society. "We need more teams in Boston," Bennett said. A lead that emerged during the arrest led to the discovery of a distribution center used by the criminal organization to move victims between states. Sandra Mitchell, the former shelter employee who had provided crucial evidence, could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Under federal protection, she continued to collaborate with the investigations, filling in gaps in the timeline of the crimes. As the day progressed, more details about the extent of the criminal operation came to light. Dozens of politicians, businessmen, and civil servants were arrested. The network of corruption that had protected the New Aurora Foundation for years was finally crumbling. Rachel received an important call from the forensics team investigating Elizabeth Harrison's accident. New evidence definitively confirmed that her death had been planned. The hitman hired to silence her was among those arrested that morning. "We did it, Elizabeth," murmured Dorothy, looking at an old photo of her friend. "Your girls are safe now." Ashley and Madison were transferred to a new protection center, specially prepared to receive the survivors of the scam. There, with adequate support, they could begin their process of healing and rebuilding. Lauren Rodriguez coordinated Richardson's transfer to federal custody. The former shelter director, now confronted with the magnitude of the evidence against him, began negotiating a plea bargain. "This is just the beginning," said Amanda Reese at an impromptu press conference. "We will follow every lead, investigate every connection, until all those responsible are brought to justice." As the sun set on Portland, Rachel Winters finally allowed herself a moment of reflection. What had started with a call from an elderly woman about crying in a basement had turned into the biggest operation of her career. In the house next door to the old Harrison mansion, Dorothy and Nancy shared a cup of tea in silence, watching the coming and going of vehicles and news crews. The truth that Elizabeth had fought so hard to reveal had finally come to light, bringing with it the promise of justice and change. A week after Operation Aurora, Rachel Winters watched the sunrise over Portland through her office window. The last 7 days had been intense, with new revelations emerging by the hour as the full extent of the new Aurora Foundation's criminal network was exposed. "The final numbers are in," said Bennett, entering the room with a thick report in hand. 147 minors rescued in 5 different states. 83 arrests, including 3 state senators, 2 federal judges, and dozens of prominent businessmen. The investigation had turned into one of the largest human trafficking cases ever uncovered in recent U.S. history. The FBI established a special task force dedicated exclusively to tracking down the international ramifications of the scheme. Ashley Cooper, now recovered enough to leave the hospital, had become a powerful voice for survivors. Her courage in testifying was inspiring other victims to come forward, creating a wave of testimonies that further strengthened the case against the Foundation. "We are no longer invisible," Ashley declared during a protected interview with the national press. "Elizabeth Harrison saw us when no one else wanted to, and now the whole world is seeing the truth." Dorothy Morgan and Nancy Harrison worked tirelessly with the prosecution, organizing decades of evidence collected by Elizabeth. The material was proving crucial in establishing the historical pattern of abuse and connecting important figures to the criminal scheme. "We found something interesting." Nancy showed Rachel a series of old photographs. Aunt Elizabeth documented secret Foundation meetings going back to 1998. Some of these people are still in positions of power. Lauren Rodriguez was now coordinating a special team dedicated to investigating suspicious deaths related to the case. In addition to Elizabeth Harrison, at least 6 other people who had tried to expose the Foundation over the last 2 decades had died under questionable circumstances. Richardson, facing multiple federal charges, finally broke under the pressure. In a testimony session that lasted 12 hours, he revealed details about the internal structure of the criminal organization and provided names of politicians and businessmen who have not yet been identified. The New Aurora Foundation was just one arm of something much bigger, he explained to prosecutor Amanda Reese. There are other similar organizations operating in different parts of the country, all connected through an international network. Madison Taylor and Kayla Peterson, younger than Ashley, found purpose in helping other survivors. At the Protection Center, specially established for rescued victims, they served as mentors for younger girls, showing them that healing and recovery were possible. Christina Martinez developed a pioneering psychological support program for the survivors, incorporating individual and group therapy, as well as activities that help rebuild the rescued girls' self-esteem and confidence. "Trauma doesn't define who they are," Christina explained during a meeting with the investigation team. "Each of these girls has incredible inner strength. Our job is to help them rediscover that strength." Mayor Sullivan, arrested at his mansion during the operation, began cooperating with the authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony revealed an extensive network of bribes and favors that had allowed the Foundation to operate with impunity for so long. Sandra Mitchell, the former shelter employee who had provided crucial evidence, was finally able to come out of witness protection. Her testimony was instrumental in connecting Richardson to high-ranking politicians and establishing the pattern of threats used to silence potential whistleblowers. "Elizabeth tried to get me to talk years ago," Sandra revealed to Rachel during an interview. "I was very afraid at the time. Her death made me realize that silence makes us accomplices." The property in New Hampshire, where several young women had been held before being transported out of the country, has been converted into a rehabilitation center for survivors of human trafficking. Dorothy suggested that it be named Elizabeth Harrison House, a tribute to the woman who had given her life fighting the corrupt system. "This is how we keep her legacy alive," said Dorothy, observing the renovation work on the site, turning a place of pain into a haven of hope and healing. Rachel Winters, reviewing the evidence for the first trials to come, found an unopened letter among Elizabeth Harrison's belongings. Addressed to those who find the truth, the letter contained a final plea: "Don't let the system continue to break these young women. Each of them deserves a chance to rebuild their lives, to dream again." If you're reading this, it means that the truth has finally come to light. Use it to ensure that no other girl suffers what they did. The investigation continued to reveal new connections and ramifications. But the most significant change was visible on the faces of the survivors. Where once there was fear and despair, Hope was now beginning to emerge. Ashley, Madison, and Kayla, the three girls whose cries in an abandoned basement had triggered the entire investigation, were now taking part in a special program to help identify and rescue other victims. Their experience and courage were proving invaluable to the ongoing operations. Elizabeth always said that the truth has a power of its own, Dorothy commented to Rachel during a quiet afternoon on her balcony. Once released, it finds its way to the light, no matter how long it takes. As the sun set over Portland, Rachel thought about how a simple tip-off from an elderly woman had led to the dismantling of one of the largest criminal networks in the country. The truth, buried for so long, had finally found its voice through the survivors who now, free from fear, could tell their stories. Elizabeth Harrison's legacy lived on not only in the lives saved, but in the courage she inspired in others to continue her fight for justice. The dawn she had waited for had finally arrived, bringing with it the promise of a new dawn for hundreds of young people who, like Ashley, Madison, and Kayla, could now dream of a future free from the fear and darkness that had imprisoned them for so long.